So now I've got to take that seriously and say, okay, what is the evidence that Jesus is a false prophet? What is the evidence that Jesus is reliable? I can't just say, I believe. Yeah, who gives a rip? We're trying to find out what's true, what's real. And if you believe in Jesus, because I believe in Jesus, you're a fool, right? And if I believe Jesus is a false prophet just because you said it, I'm a fool, right? You and I, as thinking human beings, we got to go and study the data. By and who was it written to? Let's study context. Leviticus was written by Moses, written to a people of Israel who lived in a theocracy. Not a democracy, not a monarchy, a theocracy. And in this theocracy, God was calling the Jews to be different from all of the cultures surrounding them. And when you study the laws on slavery and compare it to the cultures around, what you see is God is calling the Jews out of chattel slavery, out of dehumanizing slavery. But was there a type of indentured servitude? Yes, there was, which is very similar to the Roman Empire, right? In the first century, over 50% citizens in Rome were slaves. Not chattel slavery like we had here in the United States, but indentured servant. Doctors were slaves, lawyers were slaves, so it's a different context.
But the previous verses were about not being able to do that kind of slavery on Israelites. But
yes.
It does talk about how you can do that to the nations around you. That's what the distinction is in the book, I believe. I'm Jewish, I'm used to reading the Hebrew, but I looked it up in English, and that's what it says, is I can't do that to other Jewish people, but I can do that to the nations around me.
Yes.
So how does it really, if the goal is to spread love to everybody and to instill these values to everybody,
right,
why would it be fair for me to treat other people of other nations in that way?
Good question. What you will discover is, when you read both the New and the Old Testament, is that God's ideal is in Genesis 1 and 2. In Genesis 3, we read about the fall. Adam and Eve rebel against God. And everything goes crazy. And what you have in the Old Testament and in much of the New Testament is God calling people out of the craziness step by step. Now, I want you to read Matthew chapter 19. Jesus is pressed with a question. Jesus, you've just said that divorce is wrong. But in the Torah, we read, Moses says, if you want to divorce your wife, give her a certificate of divorce. So you're contradicting the Torah, Jesus, when you say divorce is wrong. Because Moses said, you want to divorce your wife, give her a certificate of divorce. And Jesus responds, Moses permitted this because your hearts were hard. But it was not that way from the beginning. And he goes right back to Genesis 2, which is pre-fall, pre-curse, when everything breaks loose and goes crazy. So what you have in the Bible is God calling people out of sin, out of injustice, but it's often step by step. For instance, Paul in the New Testament says, slaves, obey your masters. Well, what are you talking about, Paul? Slaves obey your masters? Why don't you just call all slaves to be like Spartacus and rebel against their masters? Freedom. Because Paul is deciding, I am convinced, that it's more important that people come to faith than it is that they necessarily have their economic freedom.
Well, how does that go with the virtues then? Because that leaves it up to interpretation of the era, right? So your form of free will and justice may be different than what it was for Moses, what it was for Jesus, what it will be in 100 years. How can we justify your form of what that virtue is today then?
Very good question. I think the answer is you're going to have to do your homework. And you're going to have to realize from studying Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy that is being addressed to a specific culture, the Jewish people, at a specific time. Because you're right. Stone an adulteress, right, in Leviticus. And then what happens in John 8? The guys bring the adulteress to Jesus and they say, can we kill her? And Jesus says, no. The one among you who's never had a desire to commit this sin, you go ahead and you throw the first stone. Is Jesus living in a theocracy? No. Israel is under the oppression of Rome. So it's a totally different government at that time. Is there a difference between the moral law and the civil law in Leviticus? Yes, sir. There's a lot of civil law for the theocracy of Israel that Jesus never held to and that I don't hold to. But it's a history of how God worked in the Jewish people And at that point in history, it was a theocracy.
But the function today in Judaism is, at least, we see these 300 or so laws as the Word of God, as the law of God that we should follow, study, and interpret. How does that evolve in the New Testament? That if it's another evolution of that, why does that invalidate any other religion and their interpretation of what these virtues are? So, like, in Judaism, I interpretly different than in the Second Testament, the New Testament, right? Different than the Mormons in their added book. I think a big argument is, even if you make arguments that God exists and God is real, that's still, which are debatable, you talk about Nietzsche and other things, but how does that apply? Why is Christian values and virtues necessarily predominant over, let's say, Sikhism or Hinduism or Judaism?
Right. Okay, first point is, in the Torah, I make a clear distinction between moral law and civil law, between the 10 Commandments. And all Jesus did was validate the 10 Commandments. Civil law, he contradicted. But the 10 Commandments, no, he held to uncompromisingly, and so do I. All right? So there is that difference. Moral law versus civil law. Secondly, God speaks into different cultures, but the truth of there being one God, the truth of Jesus Christ being that one God in human form, the truth of ethics, that adultery is absolutely wrong, that stealing and coveting are absolutely wrong, that doesn't change. Those are moral absolutes. But exactly how those are applied to different cultural situations, yes, that does change at times.
But if Jesus is the absolute savior of everything, shouldn't that apply everywhere? Shouldn't that apply to every culture?
Yeah, and it does. He is the absolute savior who offers salvation to every Hindu, Buddhist, Jew, Gentile.
But if God made me a custom plan that works better for my people, why is that any less valid as well? If he hands that down through his form of virtue for my time, for my people.
You bet.
Why is that any less valid?
It's not less valid. But what Jesus is claiming is to be the fulfillment of those prophecies that the great Hebrew prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, gave. So Jesus does not contradict the Old Testament. He claims to be the fulfillment of the law, the fulfillment of all those Old Testament prophecies. He claims to be Messiah for the Jew. And obviously in the first century, the vast majority of followers of Christ were Jews. Which really drives you back to, did Jesus really rise from the dead? Because these Jews changed radically from a strict type of monotheism to believing in Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They changed from holding tightly to the Sabbath to worshiping on Sunday in celebration of the resurrection of Christ. They changed from strict Mosaic law to grace. Why? Why did devout Jews change like that in the first century? They insisted because Jesus Christ rose from the dead.
Judaism has a key sin, right? So from the Jewish perspective, we see Jesus as a prophet, not as the Messiah, and his key sin is saying that he is God. That is his major sin to us.
Right.
And that's not just because of the rise and fall. We talked about how many of the prerequisites to being Messiah is being the son of the house of Jacob. But if divine immaculate exception is the case, you can't be son of a certain tribe. There's some certain things that we say, not trying to invalidate anything, that why he is not our Messiah. And going back to that point, it's like, if Jesus is not our Messiah, if he was the Messiah, he would have brought in all the Jews. I'm a Jew that follows the Old Testament, the old laws. Not everyone switched over. Right. And why would that be the case if he really did fulfill the Jewish role of Messiah? And I don't think that's the case, and I think that goes back to, not saying my religion is one way or the other, but mine is my path to God. I don't see why Jesus is the best path for people who might be Hindu, Sikh, Christian, or whatever. In Judaism, we have something called the no-high laws. We have 7 rules. It's like, don't kill, pretty simple stuff like that. The things we might call natural laws.
Right. Right.
That apply to everybody, and like, you're good in Judaism if you do that, but those are like really simple things. Why would we need to be held to a Christian standard then?
Okay. Do you think that the Torah is narrow-minded when it insists, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself"? Is that narrow-minded intolerance of polytheism? Do you think there's one God, or do you think there are many gods? Obviously, the Torah insists there's one true God. You think it's lying? Is it narrow-minded and bigoted, or is it speaking the truth? What do you think?
I personally, it functions for me as truth, but I objectively don't feel like I can validate that beyond someone else's. So, in my perspective, I get value out of my religion, and through experiencing it and practicing in it is how I build a relationship with God, but it's the practice. It's not necessarily the fact that it's monotheism, it's one God. It's that through the commandments of God, I try to live a better life. And that works for me through my religion, and that could be true through a polytheistic religion too.
How on earth can you honestly read the Torah and walk away saying you can be a polytheist? How can you read Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, the way they confronted the polytheism of Assyria, Babylonia, the Canaanites? How can you stand here and say, I follow the Torah and polytheism is an option?
Because it's not predicated on converting others. You can be polytheistic and still be good in the eyes of the Jewish people. The 7 Noahide laws say nothing about believing in one God.
Well,
it's about,
sure.
it's my personal belief is I think those arguments are strong.
Okay.
I do believe in monotheism, but I don't think that it's invalidating a polytheism. Like, I don't think that that necessarily excludes you from living a good life and a moral life.
All right, let's be real clear. I got a lot of atheist friends and a lot of agnostic friends. Every single one of them is a really good person. And I celebrate that. All of my atheist friends are really, really good people. But we obviously contradict each other when it comes to the existence of God. My atheist friends are convinced there is no God. I am convinced that God is real and that Jesus Christ is God in human form. And I think it's highly disrespectful for me to look into my atheist friend's face and say, we believe the same thing about God. No, we don't. He's convinced there is no God. I'm convinced there is a God. Now, unfortunately, both cannot be true. There cannot be no God and, yes, there is a God at the same time. The law of non-contradiction holds true. Like it or not, it's not something I made up. A and non-A cannot both be true at the same time in the same way. It's impossible. So either my atheist friend is correct, there is no God, or else I'm correct. There is a God. What's true? If there is no God, morality is relative. You make it up in your head, the Chinese make it up in their heads, the KKK make it up in their head, the white South African makes it up in their head. It's all relative. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong, because you can't empirically prove it. So therefore, if my preference is to go up to her, punch her lights out, that's my preference. My preference is not wrong, my preference is not right. My preference just is, and you've got your preferences, which might agree with me at times, might disagree, but you're not right, I'm not wrong, I'm not right, you're not wrong. Now, theism, a belief in God, says trash, baloney to that. Theism, a belief in Jesus Christ, says she is a precious human being created in the image of God, which means she has dignity, value, and significance. Furthermore, Jesus Christ and theism teach that God created me for a purpose, and that purpose was not to walk up to her and punch her. The purpose that God gave me a hand and a mind was to love her and to respect her. Tolerance is not me saying, you're an atheist and I'm a theist. We believe the same thing, that's tolerance. No, that's not tolerance, that's being brain dead. Brain dead. It's not respecting a person enough to listen to understand what they believe. Tolerance is, you and I disagree. I still respect you. Why would I respect you? Because I'm convinced you're not just a gorgeous hunk of primordial slime evolved to a higher order. You're a human being created in the image of God. And God created me to respect you and not to disrespect you. And so tolerance is Jesus bleeding and dying on a cross, praying for those who nailed him to the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. That is the essence of tolerance. Loving your enemy, which is exactly what Jesus taught and modeled. If you can't scientifically prove something, it's not true. I just look back in that person's face and say, would you please scientifically prove to me that unless I can scientifically prove something, it's not true. And what I'm trying to drive home is the statement, unless you can scientifically prove something it's not true, is not science. It's philosophy. Okay? It's a philosophical statement. Unless you can scientifically prove something, it's not true, that's not science, that's philosophy. I happen to disagree with that philosophy very strongly. Why? All right, I'm his dad, right? So, his biceps are a lot bigger than mine. But if he gets sick, I'm going to bring him to the best doctor I can. All right? But, although I respect medicine, when we go home and build our friendship, our love for each other, that has nothing to do with science. In fact, any relationship that you have has very little to do with science. It has everything to do with trust. Do you trust a person? I mean, if I have ever had the privilege to get to know you, I wouldn't scientifically prove you. I would look for evidence that you're trustworthy, that you're an honest person, that you don't lie to me, and then I would learn to trust you more and more the more evidence you gave me that you're not a con artist, you're not a charlatan, you're not a hypocrite, you're a sincere person of integrity. You see, so if anybody ever tells you science wipes out God, just look them in the face and say, really? Your definition of science is so narrow, it's scary. What friendship do you have that's based on science? Do you have a scientific relationship with your roommate? Do you guys go on scientific dates? I hope not. I really, really hope not. Okay, is this making any sense?
Yeah, but like, you know how I said like we've evolved past survival of the fittest?
Yes.
So like now the best way for us to survive is to have empathy and compassion.
Yes.
And so that kind of like explains why we have friendship and stuff. We're keeping each other alive. Okay,
good. Okay, great point. So then here's the question I got to ask myself. My love for him, my son, my love for her, my daughter-in-law, okay? Is that love programmed by my genetic makeup? Is it simply a chemical reaction? And I'm sorry, ma'am, I'm a minister at a church, and I got to work with deadbeat dads, and I got to work with deadbeat moms. And I know beyond the shadow of a doubt that no dad has to love their children. No mom has to love her children. And I'm afraid that I'm talking to some people here who know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm afraid that some of you standing right here, the odds are you had a deadbeat dad or you had a deadbeat mom. Others of you know that your parents sacrificed for you and they love the living snot out of you. No offense, but they love the snot out of you, okay? And you know that and you revel in that. But ma'am, I'm convinced nobody has to love their kid. You choose to love your kid. Now, are there genetic urges? Yes. But there are more than enough deadbeat dads that you know of to know that no dad has to love their child. See, I would argue that my observation of life and your experience of life is we have a free will. I can have a racist attitude towards her, or I can respect her as a human being created in the image of God, and I don't have to do either. I choose, and she chooses. See, it's that experience of reality that convinces me, although she's a beautiful woman with a beautiful body, she's a lot more than that. She has a soul, she has a mind, she has emotions, she has personhood, and if I have the privilege of getting to know her, we can build a trust relationship. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I have another question.
Yep.
What is a soul? Because
Good.
like I have to like explain it.
I like you. Keep going.
So like your mind, it's constantly changing, right? Like it's just a bunch of neurons that like are connecting and reconnecting constantly to create like different pictures, like individual pixels coming together, and it's constantly changing, right?
Right.
And your body is constantly changing as well.
Okay.
So you're just like a constantly changing thing here. But the reason why, like, you have one single identity is because other people perceive you as having a single identity.
Right.
And so with, like, that identity, it gives you a reason to exist, right? And so without other people to perceive you, you don't really have any identity. So how do you know that, like, you created the idea of a soul because God is always watching you, always has perception of you to give you an identity, but without God you would cease to exist as like a whole person, you know? And so how do you know that you didn't then create the idea of a soul, so that it's like giving yourself identity and existence.
Are you a psychology major?
No, I'm a neuroscience major.
No, good for you. That's awesome. Congratulations. All right. He's a counselor. I'm not. You want to start?
Neuroscientist. That's pretty impressive.
That's very impressive. Well done.
Well, I would start with, you said the mind.
Yeah.
Not the mind, you mean the brain, right? Because you're automatically...
created by the brain.
Okay, so you're granting a God.
It's not like a single entity. It's constantly changing.
So an atheist wouldn't say we have minds. It'd say a brain. But as a Christian, I don't know if you're a Christian, you'd say soul and mind. Is that right?
I think... Wait, atheists don't think that we have minds?
No, it's just a brain. It's the brain.
I don't think that
neurochemicals, how you're hardwired.
Yeah, the existence of the mind is like... You can, like, some people believe that it's like a single entity, but it really isn't. It's just created by, like, constantly changing pictures.
So this fluid identity. Well, it's so interesting as a millennial that you're saying you get your identity outside of yourself from what people say.
Yeah.
Because you know most millennials don't say that, right?
Yeah.
The vast majority of millennials say you look inside, define yourself, look at your greatest dreams, what you want to do, and then you go outside. But there's nothing identifying.
You get it from the outside because, like, you take on the identity that's given to you. So, like, you are not your name is given to you, and then you continue, like, even though you're changing, then you continuously respond to your name because you take on that name as meaning that you have a core self that doesn't really exist.
Right. And so you assume a lot of different hats that you've either given yourself, you know, daughter, mother, neuroscientist, or somebody else has given you that. And that's basically what your identity is. And a big part of your identity is self-regard, how you view yourself, how you give yourself worth. So if I'm giving myself worth, I agree with you, I can't give myself a sense of self-worth, or I'll be depressed or egotistic. Let's just love each other. Okay, but Nietzsche would say, no, that's not how things work. The strong eat the weak. We're raised red in tooth and claw, and so how is that sensical whatsoever? You're just copying Christians who are all about empathy, love, that they get from the cross. Many atheists are even writing about this right now. Terry Eagleton's an author, John Gray, basically saying, stop stealing from Christians. They are atheists themselves, but they're saying we can adapt in some way and love each other, certainly, but that springs from the Christian faith.
So you have to believe in Jesus in order to have compassion?
No. It's a good question. So okay, we're taking those as different. An atheist out here can do good. Many of my atheist friends do more good than I do. But what is the bedrock of doing good? Where does morality stand? You go into a classroom today. A teacher's saying, be good. A student asks, why should I be good? We're not going to get into that. Okay, this is actually it's very prevalent right now. I was just reading an article on it, how a student asked a professor, and he's only in 8th grade, said, why should I treat somebody like this? And she said, no, we can't do that. We can't touch that in schools. So the atheist boy and the Christian boy do just as much good, but morally speaking, why should we do good? Why should we do right? Why should we love each other? That's the question.
Let me put it real simply. Has any guy said, I love you, to you?
Yes.
What do you understand them to be saying?
That they love me.
What does that mean?
They have very strong feelings towards me. If I died, they would cry.
All right. But I am convinced that if there is no God, we have reduced reality to matter and energy. Which means, what they really mean is, I want to have sex with you.
I was thinking of my dad, so I don't think. I'll think of somebody else.
But I agree with the professor who says, if there is no God, then when a man says to a woman, a beautiful woman, I love you, what he really means is, I have this genetic drive. I have this sex drive. And I would really like to satisfy my sex drive by hopping into bed with you. And the woman objected and say, well, that's not fair, that's not right. And the professor said, oh, yes, it's right. If all of reality is matter and energy, then there is no such thing as a free will where you choose to care for somebody. No, that person meets one of your biological sexual needs. And because they meet your need, you're attracted to, you want to be with them. The moment you lose your ability to meet their need, it's bye-bye. You're of no use to me any longer. See, now that's consistent atheism. That's what Nietzsche was getting at. That this whole value of I love you, which does not mean I just want to have sex with you, but it means I am concerned about you, I care for you. I am interested in your success. I'm interested in your thriving and flourishing. That means that there's more to me than just complex neurons going off. There's a me, a soul, like you were asking earlier, and he created me for the purpose of respecting you, not using you like a cute Barbie doll. And that is what is wrong with lust. That's what's wrong with pornography. That's what's wrong with sex outside of marriage. Because what it's doing is, it's reducing ourselves to sex objects, to sex toys. And what Jesus Christ points out is, a person is not a sex toy. A person has a soul. There's a real person here. But when I understand that you have a soul, that you're a person with a mind, emotions, a conscience, then it is appropriate for me not to figure out how I can use you and manipulate you. Instead, it's appropriate for me to learn how I can help you, how I can help you become a success. And to be honest with you, that's why we're doing what we're doing out here. I'm praying with everything in me that every one of you at some point in your life is going to put your faith in Jesus Christ. Why? Because I think that's what it means ultimately to be a success. To understand the purpose of life and to have eternal life in heaven. And blast it all, I would like to see you in heaven. Now, if you got a problem with that, so be it. I want everybody here to go to heaven. I am convinced the way to heaven is by putting your faith in Jesus Christ.
My question is that once you move into theism, sure, away from moral relativism,
yes,
and postmodernism, which one can argue that falls apart easily. On this planet, there are approximately 3,000 deities that are worshipped by what's considered a critical number of people.
Good.
And only 23% of the human beings on this planet worship your God. And worship small, even within that. So Christianity only makes up 23% of this planet. So other than cyclical references back to the Bible, yes, and back to Christian teachings,
yeah,
what is the argument for your God versus all of the other gods?
You bet.
Or any of the other gods?
Read them.
But that's back
Simply
into your teachings. So I can't...
Well, yeah. If I want to find out about Siddhartha Gautama Buddha, I'm not going to just go up to some Buddhist and ask. I'm going to go to the teachings of Siddhartha Gautama Buddha.
Right.
If I want to find out about Islam, I don't go to 9/11. That's bigotry, right? You go to the Quran and you read, what did Muhammad teach and how did he live? And if you want to find out about Jesus, good gracious, guys, you don't go to the Crusades and the Inquisition, and you don't go to some fundamentalist Christian who says Jesus is a Republican. Jesus was not a Republican, obviously. Instead, you go to the source documents, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the eyewitness accounts, and you figure out who is this Jesus from the eyewitness accounts.
But then how... Okay, so I guess if we're talking, there are a couple of arguments going on here. It's whether you're arguing that your God is real and other gods aren't. Is that the case you're making? I've only been here for about a half an hour, so are you arguing that your God is real and Allah isn't, or other gods aren't real? That's just yes or no.
No, the reason it's not yes or no is because obviously I'm convinced that a Muslim is in touch with reality when they respect God.
So you're saying they're slightly misinterpreting God?
No, I wouldn't say that either. I would say that they have chosen to believe in a false prophet, Muhammad.
Okay, but wouldn't I say you chose to believe in a false prophet, Jesus?
Of course you would.
Why does that logic follow
right,
you to the Muslims, but me to you? Like, why? That's like an endless train of possibility, isn't it?
No, it's not. It's an issue of studying the source documents, and then you come into your own decision. It's that simple. This is not that hard. So you're right. From your perspective, your opinion is, I worship a false god, a false prophet. I understand that. So now I've got to take that seriously and say, okay, what is the evidence that Jesus is a false prophet? What is the evidence that Jesus is reliable? I can't just say, I believe. Yeah, who gives a rip? We're trying to find out what's true, what's real. And if you believe in Jesus, because I believe in Jesus, you're a fool, right? And if I believe Jesus is a false prophet just because you said it, I'm a fool, right? You and I, as thinking human beings, we got to go and study the data, study the evidence.
That sounds a lot like empiricism.
No, it's not empiricism, it's rational thinking.
Right, which sounds very scientific.
But doesn't that also go back to
Science uses reason, but so does philosophy, which is not
But
science.
faith is defined as belief without evidence.
Good, and I
In the dictionary.
I reject that definition of faith. I think that what you've just said is the better definition is gullibility. If you have faith with no evidence, you're a gullible fool and someone will eat your lunch.
Okay, so if we want to go into semantics here.
No, it's not semantics.
No, faith is literally defined as belief without reason. Literally.
That's a faith position you're taking right there.
How?
Because you're saying,
Belief in
this
the
is how
dictionary?
I... Hold up right now. Hold up. That's Mark Twain's definition of faith right there. Hold up. Faith is based completely off of reason.